in an enchanted garden, where the flowers bloomed in bright colors and the scent of roses filled the air, lived a mysterious inhabitant, the Rose Elf. His home was the most magnificent of all roses, and within this enchanted bloom unfolded a tale of love, tragedy, and avenging flowers. Deep within the delicate petals of the rose, the elf hid his secret, while the rose petals sang their own melody of love and loss. Enter the world of the Rose Elf, where every flower is an echo of past tears and every breath of wind whispers a tale of the hidden. The Rose Elf, a fairy tale by Hans Christian Andersen. In the midst of a garden grew a rose tree in full blossom, and in the prettiest of all the roses lived an elf. He was such a little wee thing that no human eye could see him. Behind each leaf of the rose, he had a sleeping chamber. He was as well-formed and as beautiful as a little child could be, and had wings that reached from his shoulders to his feet. Oh, what sweet fragrance there was in his chambers, and how clean and beautiful were the walls, for they were the blushing leaves of the rose. During the day, the elf enjoyed the warm sunlight, flying from flower to flower and dancing on the wings of butterflies. He also counted how many steps it took him to cross the country roads and footbridges that were on a single linden leaf. To him, the veins on a leaf were like streets and footbridges. It was as if he had miles to go. But the sun set before he was finished. He had started late. When it got cold and the dew fell, it was time to go home. But the rose had closed, and the elf could no longer get in. Not a single rose was opened. The poor elf was frightened. He had never stayed outside at night, and had always slept peacefully behind the warm rose petals. This could now mean the end. At the other end of the garden, he knew, was an arbor with beautiful evergreen honeysuckle. The flowers looked like painted horns. The elf wanted to go down there and sleep until morning. The elf flew to the arbor, but there were already two people inside, a young man and a beautiful girl. They sat together wishing they would never be separated because they loved each other so much. "Nevertheless, we must part," said the young man. "Your brother doesn't like me. He sends me far away across mountains and lakes. Farewell, my sweet bride, because that's what you are." They kissed, and the girl cried before giving him a rose. Before handing him the rose, she placed a firm kiss on it, and the flower opened. The elf flew in and leaned his head against the fragrant walls. Here he could hear the two saying goodbye. "Farewell," and the rose was placed on the young man's breast. Oh, how his heart beat. The elf could hardly sleep because of his excitement. But the rose did not rest on her breast for long. The man took it out and kissed the flower as he walked alone through the dark forest. He kissed the rose so often and so hard that the little elf was almost crushed. Then a man came, dark and evil. He was the pretty girl's brother and pulled out a sharp knife. While he was still kissing the rose, the evil brother killed him, cut off his head, and buried it with the body under the linden tree. "Now he is forgotten and gone," said the evil brother. "He was supposed to go on a long journey, over mountains and lakes. You can easily lose your life there, and that has now cost him his head. He's not coming back, and my sister won't find out anything." Then he scraped withered leaves over the loose earth with his foot, and walked home again through the dark night. But he did not go alone, as he thought, for the little elf accompanied him. He was sitting in a rolled-up linden leaf that had fallen into his evil brother's hair while he was digging. Now the hat was put on it, and it was so dark inside that the elf's whole body was shaking with fright and anger at the bad deed. In the morning hour, the evil brother came home. He took off his hat and went into his sister's bedroom. There the beautiful, blooming girl lay and dreamed of her lover, to whom she was so kind, and who she believed walked over mountains and through forests. The evil brother leaned over her and laughed spitefully. Then the dry leaf fell from his hair onto the blanket, but he didn't notice it, and went out to get a little sleep himself. The elf slipped out of the withered leaf, sat in the sleeping girl's ear, and as if in a dream, told her the terrible murder. He also took her to the place where his brother had killed him and buried his body, told her about the blossoming linden tree and said, "You must not believe that what I have told you is just a dream. That is why you will be on your own. Find a withered leaf in the bed." And that's what she found when she woke up. Oh, what bitter tears she cried. But she wasn't allowed to confide in anyone about her pain. The window to the garden was wide open all day. The little elf could easily get out to the roses and other flowers, but he couldn't bring himself to leave the sad woman. There was a bush with monthly roses in the window. He sat down in one of the flowers and looked at the poor girl. The evil brother often came into the room. He was so cheerful and yet so bad, but the girl was careful not to reveal her knowledge. When night fell, she sneaked out of the house and went into the forest to the place where the linden tree stood. She took the leaves from the earth, dug them up and found her lover, who had been killed. Oh, how she cried and asked the good Lord that she too would die soon. She would have liked to take the body home with her, but she couldn't. Then she took the pale head with the closed eyes, kissed the cold mouth and shook the earth from his beautiful hair. "I want to keep this," she said. And when she had laid the earth and the dead leaves on the body, she took the head and a branch of the jasmine bush that bloomed by the grave. Then she went home crying. As soon as the girl came into her room, she got the largest flower pot she could find. She placed the dead man's head in this, poured earth on it, and planted the jasmine branch on it. "Farewell, farewell," whispered the little elf. He couldn't bear to see all this pain any longer and flew out to his rose in the garden. But it had bloomed, and there were only pale leaves hanging on the green rose hip. "Oh, how soon all the beautiful and good things will be over," sighed the elf. Nevertheless, he found another rose that became his apartment. He could live comfortably behind its fine and fragrant leaves. Every morning he flew to the poor girl's window, and every time she stood by the flower pot and cried, the bitter tears fell on the jasmine branch, and each day she looked paler. The branch looked fresher and greener. One shoot after another sprouted, little white buds blossomed, and she kissed them. But the evil brother scolded her and asked if she had become foolish. He couldn't stand it and couldn't understand that she kept crying over the flower pot. He didn't know which eyes and which lips had found their graves there. One day, the little elf found the girl sleeping with her head leaning against the flower pot. Then he sat in her ear and talked about the evening in the arbor, about the scent of the rose and the love of the elves. How sweetly and gently she dreamed, life vanished from her. She had died and was now with her lover in heaven. Then the jasmine flower opened its large white bells. They smelled so wonderfully sweet, as if they couldn't cry over the dead. But the evil brother looked at the beautiful bush, took it as his inheritance, and put it in his bedroom, close to his bed. The little rose elf came along and flew from blossom to blossom, because there was a little soul in each one. The elf told about the murdered young man, whose head was now earth beneath the earth, told about the evil brother and the poor sister. "We know it," said every soul in the flowers. "We know it. Didn't we spring from the eyes and lips of the slain? We know it. We know it." And then they nodded their heads strangely. The rose elf couldn't understand how they could be so calm. And he flew out to the bees that were gathering honey and told them the story of the evil brother. The bees told their queen, and she ordered them all to punish the murderer the next morning. But that night, the brother slept in his bed again, close to the fragrant jasmine bush. Then every flower cup opened, and invisibly, but with poisonous spears, the flower souls rose out and sat in his ear, told him bad dreams, flew over his lips and pricked his tongue with poisonous spears. "Now we have avenged the dead," they said, and flew back into the white bells of the jasmine. When it was morning and the window of the bedroom was suddenly thrown open, the rose elf drove in with the queen bee and the entire swarm of bees to kill him. But he was already dead. There were people standing around the bed and they said, "The scent of jasmine killed him." Now the rose elf understood the revenge of the flowers and told the queen bee. She was buzzing around the flower pot with her whole swarm, and the bees couldn't be chased away. Then a man took away the flower pot, A bee swooped down and stung him in the hand, causing him to drop the pot and break it. Then everyone saw the pale skull, and they knew that the dead man in the bed was a murderer. The queen bee hummed in the air, and sang of the reaving of the flowers, of the rose elf, and that behind the smallest leaf there lives one who can tell and avenge evil.